keeping the show rolling with more segments. Before I jump into the third one, I want to remind you guys one last time on today's show, if you have any questions or comments you want to make throughout the show, use the tip and donations link that you see on your screen, GSMCPodcast.net. Using that link makes it able for me to see your question in the chat box, read it on air, and carry the conversation that way, react to whatever you guys have to say. It's a massive help for this show as well as all the other shows on the network, and we always show great appreciation to you guys anytime anyone is able to use that link with a question or comment. But going back to the segments, the show now on hand, Brock Purdy, we've talked a lot about John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan, the organization, and how they've handled some free agent losses, the draft, and how do they stay relevant, stay at the top of the NFC with their players, with keeping this team together. A big part of that was Brock Purdy and how well he played this past year, being a game winner, a catalyst for this team in some tight games where he made game-winning plays and got them to the Super Bowl, large in part because of his play. And now he's come back out of his time off, of his off-season. Recently, over this past weekend, local media was at his youth football camp that he held at the 49ers home stadium, and they talked with him several topics, and one of them was the Super Bowl loss, how he has recovered in a sense from it, what he thinks about it now, has he had a chance to go over the game, to which he said, it still just stinks because there were plays out there that could have been made. I feel like there were a couple plays where I'm like, dude, that could have been the difference, but that's across the board. It's 4 quarters of every play matters. Mentioned how he's watched the game back already multiple times and has already caught those missed chances that he talked about in his answer. And he also talked about that that it did give him hope because they still have basically every starter coming back on offense at least, and he emphasized that learning process, that experience, that it is tough to swallow in the moment, but it is certainly able to be helpful for him. Still a young player, a young quarterback in this league. I'm sure it'll be a learning moment for him to grow out after that. And he transitioned into that desire now into the spring practices and getting back into the full as you can get swing of things with the team, with everybody getting back. And he said, I know guys like Christian, George, and Debo are all thinking like that. The fact that we've all played together for a year and a half now, that gives us a lot of confidence. Why wouldn't it? You just mentioned 3 of the best players at their position in this offense. They're stacked from top to bottom at offense, at defense as well, with Fred Warner leading them on that side of the ball. I still think they're at top of the NFC. Brock Purdy certainly thinks that they can get back there. It's just a matter of now solving some of the bigger topics with this team. When you have a team that's this good, that's in the prime, that's in their Super Bowl window that everyone likes to use, it's usually the topics off the field, the contracts, free agency, coaching hires, that usually get in the way are things that you have to handle now, and that's certainly one thing that was talked about, the contract extension of Brock Purdy. He showed his appreciation to the 49ers CEO, Jed York, for saying last month that quarterbacks should be paid a lot and that they're planning Brock Purdy's contract extension already for next year or his next contract whenever it does come, next offseason or the following. He said it was a good problem to have. To sum it up, he knows it's something you just have to get done. If you have a good quarterback, he accepts it, and he seemed willing to give Brock Purdy the contract that he deserves. And those were pretty flattering words at the time when I talked about it. He seemed pretty open, and not a lot of executives or people within the organization are so upbeat about it. They acknowledge that it's coming. They'll say something like, yeah, we know it's coming, or when we get to it, when it happens, it happens. Stuff like that. They keep it pretty stale. But he seemed very optimistic about it, and Brock Purdy showed his appreciation and also acknowledged that it is still a job and that I have to win games for this organization, and I have to get better starting here at OTAs. Everything will fall into place that it needs to, and that's how I'm looking at it. But I appreciate his kind words. Definitely appreciative of Jed York's comments on the contract talks, the money talks. Brock Purdy is still due to make $1.1 million on the salary in 2024. And right now, to compare him, to kind of project what kind of contract he could get, there are 12 quarterbacks making at least $12 million per year. So you'd expect him to fall in that group. We just finished talking about Tua and how the minimum seems to be, to me, 45. It could be 40, but I think, I mentioned 12 quarterbacks make at least $40 million per year. I don't think, just based off of last year, that there are 12 quarterbacks that anybody can name have a better chance at reaching a Super Bowl than Brock Purdy. There's definitely a handful of them, probably 7 or 8, that you would put in there pretty confidently. But then after that, I think you start really thinking hard of who you would even put in that conversation over Brock based on how he played, having a great year last year. And people will discredit him because they're stacked. They have a lot of great players. But like I mentioned in the playoffs, he made a lot of winning plays in some of the tough moments of the game against the Packers, against the Lions as well. He deserves some credit, and I'm sure, like Tua, I have confidence in him, and I'm sure he'll get a worthy contract of his talents, probably in that 47 to 50 range, if I were to guess, for the 49ers on how well he also plays this season, because I don't think an extension will be worked out this offseason. Next year, like their CEO, Jed York, said, they're anticipating that conversation being held. So we'll see how well he performs this year. If he makes another Super Bowl, expect him to be up there in the 50 ranges, I would probably guess, when those conversations are held. But the last thing Brock Purdy talked about and that the local media asked him about was this whole situation going on with Brandon Aiyuk. If you haven't been following it, he is due for a contract extension, or he thinks he deserves one up till now. I'm sure a lot of people would agree with him. Coming off of the year he had, probably his best in the NFL. Since he was drafted, I think he has gotten better year in and year out. He has shown improvement in terms of just pass catching and being a wide receiver, just catching the ball. He has been very reliable. I say that just because Debo has been in and out. He lines up at running back. He's a very big component of this offense, but he, in all honesty, doesn't really catch 10 balls, 12 balls, 15, 8, 7. He's not really in that range. They use him all over the place, and in all honesty, they run the ball a lot, so he doesn't really get too many targets. I think they've targeted Brandon Aiyuk a lot more. He seems to be getting a lot more receptions and a lot more receiving yards than Debo. So in that aspect, he has become a very reliable weapon for them, has a great connection with Brock Purdy, and the talks are still ongoing. It hasn't been going positive. I don't think anybody would say that. There's been a lot of social media actions. He's unfollowed the team. He's posted something on his Instagram story. If you ask John Lynch about it, he says the talks are going great, that they're ongoing, that they feel confident about it, but it's not the same energy, same feeling you get from Brandon Aiyuk, and it's looking less than ideal for both parties. But Brock Purdy talked about it. He mentioned that he has talked with Brandon Aiyuk on the situation, and all he said was, I just told him I'll always have his back and support him in whatever he does. I want the best for him. It's a business thing. So for me to say anything about that, that's out of my pay grade. He and I talk through things, and I hear him out. He thanked Aiyuk later in that statement as well for the opportunity to just help him grow, help him mature, and be such an important component in his own development and having so much success as well for his career. Aiyuk was obviously a big part of that, so he made sure to thank him and show his appreciation with whatever decision Aiyuk thinks, or decides, I should say. I think, like I mentioned before, this whole situation is just giving me those A.J. Brown, Tennessee Titan sort of feelings that we saw in 2022. I think the draft will probably be where the 49ers just come to a decision. This concludes itself with Brandon Aiyuk getting dealt to some team. The Steelers have been probably the most consistent name being brought up, with Aiyuk tweeting at Mike Tomlin and all that situation. It was funny, but I think outside of the Steelers, maybe the Jaguars because they lost Calvin Ridley. The Ravens are always going to be an option because everyone always says that Lamar needs a number one receiver, so how much would they be willing to trade there? Would be interesting to see. The Bills, they just lost Stephon Diggs, so why not? Would that be an option for them? Definitely contending teams. I'm sure Aiyuk would want to go to a contending team if he was traded. That's out of his control, but ideally that's where he would want to go. Probably one of those teams, if not another one that I missed out on. But right now, I just get the feeling that they're just going to have to trade him. I don't think they can carry this on much further. Probably, if you want, into May, June. But then after that, I think it's getting to a point where I just don't think it's good because people are just going to constantly be asking about it, asking Aiyuk about it. He's going to get tired of hearing it, and he might say something that he doesn't mean, and then he just gets all blown out of proportion. If they don't get it done, they've had all this time already to work it out. By the time the draft comes in just a week, I wouldn't be shocked if they traded him to somebody else to move up in the draft and try and replace him with a top wide receiver. Now, if you go that route, that would mean trading probably into the top 10. How much more would you have to give up for that? That's something they have to weigh out, but it is an option, and I do think he will be traded in the end. And then, if that happens, this whole situation with the Niners, maybe they have to target another wide receiver now. It all would lead into different millions of scenarios that we could talk about endlessly, but for now, he's still on the team. Brock Purdy, I'm sure, is staying hopeful that he stays around. He certainly thinks highly of him, but it is a business at the end of the day. Aiyuk has earned a big contract just playing off of this year. He should get one. I think he'll get one. Now it's just a waiting game to see if it comes with the 49ers. But Brock Purdy seems to be excited to be back, hoping for a big year. We'll see how that pans out for him and the 49ers. But for us on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, we're going to go to the last break of the show. And on the other side, we're going to dive deep into the whole situation that has come to light recently with Bill Belichick, on rumors as to why he didn't get hired, what teams were interested, why they decided to turn away from him. All those details and my thoughts on it coming up after this break. You're listening or watching to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.